Pipeline analysis. Pipeline analysis and sales forecasting is the last section of this module. Before diving into the different techniques and methodologies, let us define what each of those two activities are and what they involve. What sales professionals usually refer to as pipeline is the quantity and/or dollar value of the potential deals currently at various stages of the sales process. Successfully closed-won deals are not included in the sales pipeline. Only open opportunities should be included when doing pipeline analysis. Pipeline analysis is the process of examining and monitoring the sales pipeline to understand its composition and to understand if it is sufficient to hit the sales goal in a given time frame. Now, sales forecasting is a process of estimating future revenue by attempting to predict the total value of sales that a sales unit, which can be an individual, a sales team, or even the whole company. So, by attempting to predict the total value of sales that a sales unit will sell in a given time frame, for example, in a given month, quarter, or year. Some open and all closed-won opportunities should be counted when doing a sales forecast. A sales pipeline is not the same as a sales forecast. The sales pipeline consists of all open opportunities in the sales cycle, and the sales forecast only include open opportunities that are advanced enough in the sales cycle in addition to all opportunities that have already been closed-won within the specified time frame. As a result, a full pipeline may not result in a strong sales forecast. Low close rate, along with long sales cycle, can and will impact on the accuracy of what is forecasted as future sales. The insights from pipeline analysis and sales forecasting activities feed into the decision-making process and the planning process of the sales team. They are particularly useful to sales leaders because it allows them to assess if there is a need for any corrective actions or, contrarily, a need for any action to accelerate sales target achievement. There are many tools that businesses can use to do pipeline analysis and sales forecasting. Tools such as Clary, Insight Squared, or intelligence tools such as Exactly, or other artificial intelligence tools. While those tools become more and more common, a lot of businesses still rely heavily on Excel to perform those two activities. Pipeline analysis and sales forecasting both require strong analytical skills, but also good business acumen. A good understanding of the business and the industry can help provide context and can help interpreting the data with more accuracy. For example, by acknowledging things such as seasonality, new product launch, or sales team restructuring. Using Salesforce or any other CRM data for pipeline analysis and sales forecasting requires that the sales teams maintain opportunities up to date in the system. If opportunity close dates, amounts, or stages are not representing the reality of the potential deal in the sales lifecycle, there is a risk to produce very inaccurate analysis and forecast. This is why the very first step to undertake is always to look at the sales data to assess if it is reliable enough. Here are key items to check when assessing opportunity data quality. Opportunities with past due close dates. Are there any open opportunity with opportunity close date in the past? By that we mean that the close date is set to a date before the date of the analysis. Stale opportunities. Are there any open opportunities with last activity date or last update date of more than a working week? If so, you may want to check with a sales rep that no major updates have been happening that have not been added to the opportunity, or if this opportunity is still being worked on altogether. If it is not, it should be set to closed lost. Opportunities with pushed close dates. Are there any open opportunities for which the close date has been pushed more than 3 times without any update to the opportunity stage or opportunity amount? If so, you should definitely investigate. Opportunities with no products. Are there any opportunities with missing or no products? When working as a sales operations specialist, you will expand the above and develop your own list of items to check that may be specific to the sales organization you are supporting. In all cases, if there are recurring issues with opportunity data quality, you should consider implementing notifications, workflows, and data validation checks in the CRMs that enforce timely update and other preferable behaviors from your sales team. You should also consider setting up an opportunity data quality dashboard that surfaces data issues that can negatively impact the accuracy of the pipeline analysis and sales forecast. Only when opportunity data quality level is satisfactory, you can start doing pipeline analysis. In addition to the sales performance metrics discussed at the beginning of the module, there are other more specific metrics that can be used to analyze the sales pipeline. Number of deals in the pipeline. The number of deals in the pipeline includes all open opportunities in the pipeline. This metric can be calculated for each stage of the sales process as well. Average value of opportunities in the pipeline. The average value of opportunities in the pipeline is calculated by adding the amount of all open opportunities and then dividing it by the number of open opportunities in the pipeline. Unweighted pipeline. The unweighted pipeline is the total value of all open opportunities, regardless of their opportunity stages. Weighted pipeline. The weighted pipeline is the value of opportunities based on the probability/percentage value of potential deals in each stage of the sales process. For an interesting opinion on weighted pipeline and how it relates to sales forecasting, let us watch an extract from one of Sales Hacker's webinar presented by Kevin McCone.
One of the things that I've seen in pretty much every sales organization I work in is the notion of a probability weighted pipeline. So if you visualize that spreadsheet 2 slides back, they will itemize out every deal that's in play by stage. They'll then apply a probability to it based on the stage it's at. So yeah, it's using this spreadsheet, but and then come up with what's called a weighted pipeline, right? And it's the classic deal value times its probability gives you the amount of that deal you're going to include in the forecast. It's somewhat tried and true. It's been used by a lot of people over time. It's reasonably accurate to a certain degree, but the problem with this approach I found is that it fails on a couple of fronts, and one of those is rep level variability. Some reps will tell you great things, others will tell you the wrong things, and then seasonality. I don't know about many of you, but we just finished July, and for us, summer in July is a really rough month. It's really slow between vacations for our staff, vacations for our customers, and every year July is just a hustle, and it's really frustrating month. So these probability-based models tend to not account for seasonality or rep variability, and that's generally when these fail you. And having worked in multiple seasonal businesses, this has always been a downfall of this type of approach. So it's driven me away from this approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you say rep variability, you're talking about, rep A might have a different version of what a 75% likely deal is to close versus rep B, who weights it at 75, but they're maybe more of a sandbagger or, someone has happy years.
I mean, that's a great lead into the next slide, right? So having been in this for a long time, I have found there are three breeds of salespeople. You have the sandbagger, and generally what the sandbagger's personality is, they believe that if they call a deal as coming in, they've essentially sabotaged that deal. So they will not put that deal on the forecast until literally they either were asked for the DocuSign or they see the actual signed contract. So this is the rep that has nothing in the pipeline and then closes out at 120% with 3 deals that come surprisingly in at the last day of the quarter or last day of the month, right? Mm-hmm. They always pull it out, but they're always that surprise element. The middle of the road is your ideal person, the sharpshooter as I call them, which is they know their deals, they know the process they're going through, they've confirmed timelines with their POC or their buyer, and generally they land within 5 or 10% of their forecast. And then you have the optimist, which is everything's going to be great. They hope and pray, and everything's going to come through, but they don't ask the right questions. They don't nail the process down. They don't check, all the steps they have to, and they're overcommitting until the last minute, and then every deal that they call falls out. This is a pretty common 3 personas I see. One of the things that we've implemented in our team is I have what I call the sharpshooter award. At the start of every month, we run monthly cycles. Every rep has to call their month on the 1st, and the person who comes within the closest to 100% of that number, it's got to be a reasonable number, of course. But the person that comes closest in each office gets a $100 spiff, just Venmo cash spiff, to encourage people to really hone in on their forecasting.
I like that. I've never heard of that, but I think that makes total sense. And it was interesting. I think there's a few reasons why people sandbag as well. One, it's like I don't want to sabotage, but it also goes back to what you were mentioning earlier about these constant flybys, right? If you're having to do that, I know personally a ton of enterprise reps who do that just so they don't have to deal with their executive, going, and they'll be like, yeah, I put it at 20K even though I knew it was going to be 500K, because as soon as it hits a threshold, then everyone is going to waste my time and I won't be able to get it done.
Yeah, especially if it's a bigger deal and they know it's one that we need for the quarter. You're going to get just all sorts of barraging, right?
Now, let us discuss pipeline composition. Pipeline composition looks at the number and types of opportunities at each stage of the sales process. In order to provide context to the pipeline composition, you should take into consideration how early or how late you are in a specified time frame. For instance, it is not unusual for the sales team to push opportunities through the sales process more aggressively towards quarter end or year end in order to meet their sales quotas. As a result, it could be expected that around those times, the pipeline to be composed mostly of opportunities in the later stages of the sales process. Pipeline composition analysis also allows the sales team to identify what opportunities they may want to focus on in priority. Examples of pipeline composition metrics are number of deals drop-off by stage and stage conversion rate. Number of deals drop-off by stage. By analyzing the number of deals that make it through each stage of the process, a business can understand where there are significant drop-offs and try to adjust the sales process accordingly. For instance, if there are many drop-offs at the demo or product presentation stage of the process, there may be a need for further sales training. It could be that the sales team product demonstration does not convey the value and the benefits of the solution to prospect well enough, maybe because they focus too much on detailed product features rather than benefits and value to the target customer. It could also mean that prospects are not qualified well enough before being invited to the product demo. Therefore, a large number of them may not be the right target for the solution in the first place. Stage conversion rate. In addition to understanding deal drop-off by stage, it is also useful to measure the percentage of opportunities or deals that move from one stage to the next. This metric is called stage conversion rate. The formula to calculate stage conversion rate is number of opportunities moved to next stage, n plus 1, divided by number of opportunities in stage n. For example, if a salesperson had 50 opportunities that moved to stage 1, and 25 of those moved to stage 2, then the stage conversion rate from stage 1 to stage 2 would be 50%. If out of those 25 in stage 2, 10 were moved to stage 3, then the stage conversion rate from stage 2 to stage 3 would be 40%. This formula needs to be applied for each stage move within the sales process. All the pipeline analysis metrics can be and should be reported directly in the CRM, for example, Salesforce. There is no need to perform those calculations manually because Salesforce allows you to get those numbers in real time by using reports and dashboards. If you are not using Salesforce, you should be investigating how to leverage the features of your system. In Salesforce, features such as opportunity field history, stage history, and show change deals can be used to set up those reports. If the CRM that you are using does not have or does not support similar features, then you may want to automate pipeline analysis in tools such as Excel as much as you can. Sales forecasting. As a reminder, we learned earlier that pipeline analysis is a process of examining and monitoring the sales pipeline to understand its composition and to understand if it is sufficient to hit sales goals in a given time frame. We also learned that pipeline analysis is different from sales forecasting, which is a process of estimating future revenue. This is why sales forecasting is a crucial business exercise, and sales leaders rely heavily on sales forecast reports to drive their decision-making process and their planning process. So, is it not surprising that according to Gartner, in the report titled improve revenue forecast accuracy with emerging forms of sales forecasting technology. 55% of sales leaders say that they don't have a high degree of confidence in their sales forecast accuracy. Generally, there are two types of forecasting approaches: the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is conducted by sales reps and their managers. The process involves each individual salesperson to do and submit her or his forecast. Then, the sales manager reviews and modifies up or down based on their own judgment. This approach allows the sales manager to have visibility over each sales deal, and they can choose to dive into the ones where the support and coaching might be required. The difference between the sales rep forecast and the manager forecast is called the buffer. The buffer represents the manager's view on how much the sales team will overperform or underperform in the specified time frame. Each sales manager will then submit their team's forecast to their sales leader, and the sum will provide the sales forecast for the unit or the region, for instance, up to the entire business. The bottom-up approach can be implemented in Salesforce using collaborative forecasts. Some businesses prefer to have dedicated sales forecasting tools on top of their CRM. For example, Clary, a revenue operations platform, is integrated with Salesforce and is used by many organizations. Top-down forecasting. Top-down forecasting takes the opposite approach and is conducted by the sales operations team. It relies on historical sales data and extrapolation. This means that past sales performance metrics and trends are used to predict future sales performance. Top-down forecasting can also take into consideration market and industry data such as market size, growth rate, penetration rate, and market share. In practical terms, most businesses combine those two approaches one way or another, using different techniques over different forecasting cycles. For the bottom-up approach, sales reps are usually asked to provide their individual forecast every week or bi-weekly. And week over week, variances for both individual and team forecasts are tracked by sales operations. And the insights that those forecasts provide are usually shared by sales operations in their weekly forecast report, but also during weekly or bi-weekly review meetings. For the top-down forecasting approach, the frequency will most likely be a monthly or quarterly cadence. For a very good overview of the different forecasting approaches, their advantages and disadvantages, let us watch this episode presented by Shiv Narayanan. How to forecast sales projections more effectively.
Has your company ever forecasted aggressive sales targets only to miss those very same targets quarter after quarter and have your executive team get into hot water with the board? Believe it or not, this is one of the top reasons why C-level executives get fired. That's why on this episode of How to SaaS, we're going to talk about how you can hit your quarterly and annual sales targets by forecasting more effectively and at the same time maintaining ambitious targets to grow the business. This is actually a very common problem that plagues a lot of companies. And the reason is that with investor pressure and funding comes the responsibility of growing the company faster. Quite frankly, however, a lot of that pressure is self-inflicted because we're incredibly optimistic and bullish on how fast we can grow our company, and we often overestimate how quickly we can get to the next plateau of our growth. And so this creates a vicious cycle. Executives overestimate how quickly they can grow. They end up at a board meeting where they've missed sales targets. The investors are left no choice but to ask really difficult questions. And if this happens quarter after quarter for many quarters in a row, eventually C-level executives are let go and a new management team is brought in. That's why the number one thing I like to preach to management teams in this case is to stop forecasting as a top-down exercise. Instead, it's better to use a bottom-up approach. A top-down approach looks at macroeconomic trends, market data, and extrapolates down to the company level to figure out how much of that market the company can capture. If you've ever seen an episode of Shark Tank, you'll often see entrepreneurs say something like, this market is worth $4 billion annually. Even if we capture just 1% of that market, we'll be a huge company. This is an example of a top-down approach, and this is often a recipe for disaster. Unless you're a company that is massive and operates on a global scale, macroeconomic data often has little correlation to how exactly the company will perform. Yes, knowing your market data is important. It's just about when you introduce it into your forecasting process. So for example, if you're Coca-Cola and you're trying to forecast your annual revenue targets, one of the most important data points for you would be, what is the annual volume of carbonated beverages sold and consumed? This type of data point can actually help Coca-Cola because they can say, hey, we have 30% of the market share, so based on that volume, here's a reasonable expectation of how much our market share in terms of revenue will be of the overall carbonated beverages market. However, if you are a smaller firm, let's say you're just starting out as an alternative beverage company that is trying to enter into the carbonated beverages space, that macro data is really not that helpful. Instead, micro data points can help you establish a far better forecasting model. So for example, it would be important to know how many stores can you actually sell your beverages in. It would also be important to know, on average, how much volume will each store move, so that you can forecast, hey, as we grow the number of stores that carry our product, here is what our revenue expectation would be. This is what's called a bottom-up approach, and this is what a lot of companies fail to use because they're being far too optimistic in terms of how fast they can grow. Which is a critical point here because forecasting is actually not just a math exercise. We are trying to achieve a specific goal with forecasting, which is we would like to have a model that accurately predicts sales bookings. We still want to challenge all revenue team members with stretch targets, not unachievable ones, and we want to ensure investors are being promised numbers that we are actually capable of delivering on. These are the main reasons why a bottom-up approach can serve most organizations much better than a top-down approach. Using market data is important, but we'll get to that in the later stages of building out our model using a bottom-up approach. Number two, if we're going to use a bottom-up approach, we need to understand all the different inputs of our revenue model. This is where questions like how many MQLs are being generated per channel, how many MQLs can each sales rep handle per day or per week or per month, and how much can we upsell to our existing customer base become very important in trying to figure out how much can we actually grow this business in the next year. And there are hundreds of data points that we can gather to build out this overarching revenue model for the entire business. When we look at new MRR, there are a bunch of inputs that marketing and sales need to contribute. When we look at expansion MRR, both marketing, sales, along with customer success and product need to work together to figure out what can we upsell and cross-sell to our existing customer base. And then when we look at attrition MRR or retained MRR, we need to completely understand what is driving people away from our product and how can we get them to stay longer and what are the different inputs involved. What this means is each revenue sub-team, function, or department needs to understand all the activities that contribute into the core inputs that ultimately drive revenue. And this involves building a data-driven culture where every activity is measured, every activity is tracked, all the way through from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel to know how revenue is being driven across the organization. Once we've built our revenue model and understand the different inputs involved, Now we can introduce market data and ask questions like, how much can each channel be scaled with more spend? How much demand is out there? What is our TAM/SAM, and how many more people can we reach? How many more sales reps do we need per 100 MQLs? What new channels and markets can we open up with more investment? As you can see, we've reintroduced market data into our model just at a later stage. And the reason for that is now we can make a more informed decision given that we truly understand all the different inputs of the business and how the market data can be used to scale even further. What this means is market and scaling data layers on top of our existing model, and we use a business case and ROI-based approach to evaluate all the different opportunities. A very simple example would be, let's say we go to 10 trade shows a year and they drive 100 MQLs collectively and help us close 10 big deals per year. We can then go out and make a list of all the other trade shows we can be attending, how much each trade show would cost, and forecast the revenue from each trade show based on the average number of leads and deals that we close based on our historical data. This is where the market data and the historical data and the model of the company come together into one place to help us create a better model. As you do this for every channel and for every activity, you can almost create a ranked list of potential activities that you can actually scale with more investment. And then based on the investment that each item requires and the ROI that each item can drive, we can make decisions on which initiatives get priority in our budget and our forecasting. As we make a decision on which initiatives we want to prioritize, we can ultimately roll them into our budget and forecast, which is grounded in the truth based on our input model and market data to combine them together into one forecast that we are actually capable of hitting. Once all of this work is complete, the most important step is to build sensitivity into your model. What I mean by this is to account for multiple different scenarios that can play out depending on which of your variables or inputs go your way and which ones actually don't. And this will happen. Not every variable that you're counting on will bounce your way. So a sensitivity analysis is critical to setting expectations the right way. A simple way to approach this is to use red, yellow, and green scenarios, where red is a conservative estimate, yellow is the middle ground, and green is incredibly optimistic based on if all the variables go your way. And then when you present to investors, present the yellow scenario as your projections for the following year and walk them through the entire input model along with the market data, along with the business cases and the ROI-based decisions that you've made, and say, this is why we think the yellow scenario is a stretch target and at the same time achievable to help us take this business to the next level.
As a sales operations specialist, there are 3 forecasting methods that you should know. Run rate method. The run rate method is appropriate when using the bottom-up approach. It is used to forecast future sales performance based on previous sales data. It is calculated by taking weekly, monthly, or quarterly sales figures and extrapolating them to account for a longer period of time. It can be used by both established businesses and for growing businesses without much historical data to lean on. The formula to calculate run rate is sales generated in a given time span multiplied by the number of times this time span occurred within the forecasted period. Let us illustrate with a simple example. Imagine that a business has generated $500,000 in revenue over the last 4 months between January and April. You are tasked to forecast sales revenue by end of June and by end of year based on this figure. The run rate forecast for June is 500,000 multiplied by 6/4, which is 500,000 multiplied by 1.5, which results in 750,000 in sales forecast by the end of June. So, why 6/4? Because our historical sales data covers 4 months, January to April. However, the run rate should take into consideration the duration of the forecasting period, which is 6 months, January to June. Now, for the end of year run rate forecast, the calculation is the same. 500,000 multiplied by 12 over 4, which is 500,000 multiplied by 3, which gives us an expected sales forecast or expected sales by end of year of 1.5 million. A word of caution when using run rate. Run rate does not account for sales seasonality. If a retail business generates most of its revenue in the last quarter of the year due to the Christmas, Boxing Day, and other commercial events, it will be very inappropriate to use sales data from this period to predict sales revenue for the following quarter. Similarly, if a holiday business generates most of its revenue during the summer, between June and August, let's say, it will be inappropriate to use the sales data of those months to forecast sales revenue for the rest of the year. Run rate is best used to get insight on recent sales and what to expect going forward in the short term and near future. By short term, we can understand weekly and monthly time frames. Another forecasting technique is the moving average method. It calculates the overall sales trend based on historical sales data of the company. Like the run rate, it is useful to forecast short-term sales performance, but as we will see, it can also be used for medium to long-term forecasting. The formula to calculate a moving average is N1 revenue plus N2 revenue plus N3 revenue plus NX revenue divided by N, where N is the number of time periods in the dataset. A moving average is the average of a select set of the most recent time periods. Let us illustrate with an example. Imagine that you need to forecast sales revenue for the month of July, and the sales figures for the last 5 months are 157,000 in February, 150,000 in March, 100,000 in April, 75,000 in May, 110,000 in June. Take some time, maybe pause the video and try using the formula to calculate the forecast for the month of July. The first step in using the moving average forecasting method is deciding on the number of time periods. Here we have decided to use 3 time periods. So N equal 3. The calculation will only include sales revenue for the 3 most recent time periods, April, May, and June. So the forecast for the month of July will be 100,000 plus 75,000 plus 110,000, and the sum of this divided by 3. The result is 95,000. It is now the beginning of August, let us assume, and the actual revenue generated by the sales team in July was 90,000. So our forecast was 95,000, but the actual revenue generated was 90,000. Using this figure, calculate the forecast revenue for the month of August. The forecast for the month of August will include actual revenue in July, plus actual revenue in June, plus actual revenue in May. So if we go back to the previous slide, 75,000 plus 110,000 plus 90,000 generated in July, divided by the number of time periods, which is 3. The sales forecast for August using the moving average methods is 91,660. Moving average is called moving because as you forecast a new time period, you have to remove the oldest period from the dataset. The most commonly number of periods used when calculating moving averages are 5, 4, or 3 time periods. The moving average method can also be used to forecast over a longer time frame. To illustrate, we will now watch a tutorial showing how the 3-point moving average, so 3 time periods, can be used to forecast over longer sales periods.
Hello and welcome to this video on quantitative sales forecasting. So in this video we're going to look at how we perform time series analysis to make a sales forecast, and we do that by calculating a 3-point moving average. Then we use a line of best fit to extrapolate to generate our forecast, and then finally we use the average variation approach to adjust our sales forecast to come up with a final forecasted figure. So let's go back in time a little bit and remind ourselves what sales forecasting is. Sales forecasting is a method of predicting future sales using statistical methods. Why might we do it? Well, we want to make sure we have enough sales in order to ensure good cash flow. We might need to make some operational decisions about how we run our business, organize our business in order to make sure we can meet our sales forecasts. We might need to make sure we have the right number of staff. We might also need to think about how we're going to ensure that we market properly in order to hit our sales forecast. So sales forecasting is a very useful thing for a business to do, and today we're going to look at how we go about statistically using a statistical process to make a forecast. And we do this by a process called time series analysis. And so we look at trying to predict the future sales by using past sales figures. So the first thing we have to do is collate raw sales data over time. So let's imagine that this is sales figures that we have going back from 2003 up to 2015. And these are the actual sales figures. What we're trying to do is we're going to try and create a forecast that we could use to generate 2016 and 2017's figures. And we do that by smoothing out the data using a process called moving average. So in this video, we're going to look at the 3-point moving average. So effectively, what we're trying to do is when we look at the sales data here in the actual sales data, we can see it jumps around quite a lot, 67, 70, 64, it's quite jumpy. So we want to try and smooth out some of these variations. We want a kind of a long-term trend. And so to do that, we look at taking an average. We do that by taking something called the 3-point moving average. So first of all, I need 3 pieces of data. So my first 3 pieces of data here are the first 3 years, 2003, 2005. If I take an average of those, then the average there is 67. So my 3-point moving average here for the first 3 points would be 67. If I then change and go on a year, my next 3 data points here are 70 to 61. If I take an average of those, I get 65. So those are the data points for the next 3. So we call this a 3-point moving average. The average I'm getting on the right hand side here is being smoothed out as we move along down through the sales figures. So we add up the 3 periods of data and divide by 3, and then we repeat this process. The key point is to remember that the average always goes in the middle year. So 2004 there, the 3-point moving average for 2004 is 2003, 2004 and 2005. So I've calculated my moving averages, and I can see here I've moved it on to the next one. So I've got my 3-point moving average line continuing. So I've done the first 2 steps here. If I look first of all, I've collected my raw sales data, and now I've smoothed it out by calculating these 3-point moving averages. Okay. The next step, step 3, is to plot the moving averages on a graph and draw a line of best fit to illustrate the trend. So here is my graph. The blue figures here indicate the actual sales figures that have occurred over time. And then the red line here, these are the points I've got from my 3-point moving average. So you can see it's already starting to smooth out some of the ups and downs that I experienced with my raw data. The next stage is to draw a line of best fit. And so a line of best fit really kind of summarizes the gradient of the red line there. So I should have equal amount of space below the dotted line as above when looking at my figures. So you just look at the points on your graph and you say, okay, that's the line that kind of goes through the middle, or best describes, best fits this. In reality, a lot of statistical programs like Excel, spreadsheet software for businesses will do this for them, but you just look at your graph and you put your line through. So we've done the first 3 steps now. We've looked at the data, smoothed it out, and now we've done a line of best fit. The next step is quite a fancy word here, extrapolation, to extrapolate to forecast the future sales. Really, that's quite straightforward. All we do is we just extend the line. We extend our line of best fit to the future, and now we can see that we can start to make a prediction for 2017. So if I go up on 2017 to my line of best fit, I can see that if I look at my extrapolated line and read off the axis here, that my expected sales forecast is looking like £71 million. So you might have thought that that's all the steps, but actually there is a last step here, and that final step is called adjusting for variation. So I've got my line of best fit here and I've extended it, but actually my line of best fit won't necessarily be completely accurate against my actual data. And there might be some variation that I've missed out. And so what I need to do is adjust for this variation. So here's a very good example on the right hand side. Here are my actual sales figures. Here's my 3-point moving average, my kind of smoothed out version. And I can see here there is a variation, there is a difference between the actual sales figure and the 3-point moving average. This gives me a variation. Now if I take the average of all those variances, then I would see that actually on average within a year, our moving average is 0.6 below the actual sales figures. So I find out the average here, I look at all the variations, I add them all up, so all the variations there added together are 6.67, divide by the number of variations that I have there, which is 11, my average variation is 0.61. So what that's telling me is my prediction is likely to be 0.61 lower than the actual. So I need to add this to my line of best fit to improve my forecast slightly. So my final prediction for 2017 would be 71 million from my line of best fit plus 0.61 based on my average variation. So if I include this now, my final prediction for 2017, my final forecast, I take my line of best fit, which I've extrapolated from my moving average, and then I add on, I adjust for the variation between my moving averages and what's actually happened in the past. And so my prediction for 2017 will be 71.61 million as a sales forecast. So there we have it. That's how we perform a sales forecast using time series analysis.
The last forecasting method that we will discuss in this section is the sales growth rate. Sales growth is a % growth in sales of a business from a time period to the next. For example, from a fiscal quarter to the next. Businesses that have been scaling up aggressively, such as fast-growing startups, can benefit from using sales growth rate to forecast their future performance. The formula to calculate sales growth is sales in time period 2 minus sales in time period 1 divided by sales in time period 1 multiplied by 100, where S2 is the sales revenue for the current period and S1 is the sales revenue for the prior period. Using sales growth to forecast sales revenue requires the following. Sales revenue at time period 2 multiplied by 1 plus sales growth rate, where 3 is the sales revenue forecast for the future period. By that we mean the period that we are trying to forecast revenue for. G is the sales growth rate between previous periods. Let us apply the formula to understand better how it works. Imagine that a business has generated $250,000 in Q1, $265,000 in Q2, and $273,000 in Q3. This business does not have significant seasonality, and the business has been recruiting new salespeople to support its growth. So we can assume that unless there are unforeseen market changes, Q4 performance should be in line with the previous quarters. Based on those assumptions and using the figures provided, what is a reasonable sales revenue forecast for Q4? To guide you, start with calculating the sales growth rate between Q1 and Q2. Then calculate the sales growth rate between Q2 and Q3. Feel free to pause the video to calculate and come back for the solution. Based on the numbers provided, the sales growth rate from Q1 to Q2 is calculated as per below. 265,000 minus 250,000 divided by 250,000 multiplied by 100. The sales growth rate from Q1 to Q2 is 6%. Applying the same formula to calculate the growth rate, we find that the sales growth rate from Q2 to Q3 is 3%. Indeed, we took Q3 sales revenue, 273,000, minus Q2 sales revenue, 265,000, divided by Q2 sales revenue, 265,000, multiplied by 100. In order to forecast the sales revenue for Q4 using the sales growth rate that we've just calculated, we will do Q4 sales forecast equal previous period sales revenue multiplied by 1 plus sales growth rate. So S4 in the formula here is the sales revenue forecast for the future period, so Q4. G is the sales growth rate between previous periods, so between Q3 and Q2. So, sales forecast for Q4 is 273,000 multiplied by 1 plus 3%. So when we apply the formula, the result is 281,190. A reasonable sales forecast for Q4 is therefore 280,000.